Recently, the Chivalry 2 battle card has started to become quite popular. They're just cool community made things with different event discords. They try to give back to the people who play in their events. So you have ones like this from the front lines, and then you have ones from the tournament grounds also, which are really nice too. These battle cards, they give ratings to the players in a bunch of different categories, very similar to a sports game like FIFA, Madden, or NBA 2K. So I thought in today's video, I would use some of these cards as inspiration, come up with a bunch of different categories to rate players on. I'll talk about each one and its importance, and let you guys take a look at all the different skills it takes to become one of the top players in Chivalry 2. And I think it would be really cool at the end of the video if you guys rate yourselves in the comments. Now, I'll use some categories from the tournament grounds cards as a base point, but names and categories, they'll definitely be altered. So let's start with the skill that I think is the most important to learn in Chivalry 2, and that is countering. The majority of players you run into in public lobbies can maybe counter a slash, and that's a big maybe, but the game, it really opens up once you learn to effectively counter and counter feint, since now you have a full bar of stamina for those crazy kill streaks and epic 1 versus 1 engagements. However, the absolute best players are not just good at countering bread and butter attacks. The best players in the game will drastically manipulate their swings, making them faster, slower, or just completely animation broken. Someone like Quasi, the undefeated Trial by Blood champion, his knowledge of mechanics and reactions are so good that he'll still counter this stuff with ease. Now, speaking of altering attacks, let's go with our second category, swing manipulation. We all know the basics of dragging and excelling. However, there are some players who can take this to the extreme, using mouse wiggles or rainbows to greatly alter the trajectory of their weapon and make it just extremely difficult for players to counter their hits. However, swing manipulation ability goes past just being able to perform these maneuvers, but being able to apply them. If you've ever watched Soder Dave, he's a master of just using very subtle swing manipulation to throw off his opponents. He'll condition them with those fast attacks, excel after excel, and then he'll slow it down when they least expect it with a drag and just give himself a guaranteed hit. And I think sometimes this subtle application like Dave does is even better than some of the more fancier swing manipulations. On the topic of attacking, well, what about those jabs, kicks, and specials? Let's call this our utility attack category. Jab is one of the strongest abilities in the game, and knowing how to abuse this along with timely, well set up use of kicks and specials, it's an art form. Some of the most frustrating players to fight are the ones who are able to just play around the jab, excel, one-handed play style. It's super irritating. Knowing when to throw in the risky use of specials and kicks is also something certain players seem to have a real knack for. Honestly, this category would probably be my lowest rated, as I'm not a huge fan of kicking or specials, but there is definitely a place in the game for people to use them. Now, one of the least talked about skills in Chivalry 2 is spacing, or your distance control. If you're a fan of old school boxing, Lennox Lewis or the Klitschko brothers, they were masters of keeping their opponents just on the end of their jabs, where they can hit them, but the opponent, they can't hit them back. This is what we're talking about in Chivalry 2. Controlling the distance so that you can use your weapon's reach to strike your enemy from a safe distance. You'll see strong users of spacing throw out strikes and immediately gamble after because they know they have the distance control and knowledge and that the opponent has no actual chance of hitting them back, so they can just throw out a strike. You'll even see some players bait out enemy strikes by purposely using long-range misses to get a reaction. I've always found using spacing is one of the better ways to kill players who are just extremely strong mechanically with their counters, their drags, their excels. You just kind of bait that stuff out, stay a little bit out of range, and poke them down. And this category ties in with our next one, footwork, and footwork is probably the hardest thing to teach in this game because the movements and decisions are made in tenths of a second. But the best players can use their footwork to avoid strikes, wiggling away from overheads and stabs, backing away from strikes to make them miss. Even just navigating your movement through a group fight, it requires a tremendous amount of footwork. People will always comment in my videos like, how did you get these lobbies? You're just dancing through the melee and no one touches you. And the answer is, I get the same lobbies everyone else does. I'm just using my movement or my footwork effectively. And you guys are going to notice I touched on all things in this first part that we'd call mechanics. People love to train their pure mechanical ability, but let me just use a sports reference in here again. And I know I know most gamers don't play sports, but just humor me for about 30 seconds. So, one of my favorite quarterbacks of all times to watch was Peyton Manning. Now, he didn't have the strongest arm in the league, he didn't throw a beautiful spiral, and if he did an athletic test, he would absolutely score terribly. And despite that, he was one of the GOATs. And why? Because his mental ability in the game, it was so much superior to everyone else's. And we tend to put so much focus in gaming on the raw mechanics that we forget to rate the mental aspects. And look, I'm just going to say it, there are quite a few players out there in Chivalry 2 who are all mechanics and no brains, and the mental aspects of the gameplay are why the strongest duelists are not necessarily always the strongest TO players. So let's start on our awareness or ability to process what's going on around us. Experienced top-tier players are very aware of their surroundings. They'll have a feeling for where their team is and where the enemy is. If the enemies are moving to their backside, they'll kind of recognize that and adapt. The amount of information in 32 versus 32 that needs to be processed is pretty extreme. Usually when players complain about being stabbed in the back nonstop, it's not because the other team lacked honor, it's because the complainer lacked awareness. Being able to see and understand what is going on around you is one of the most important aspects of Chivalry 2, and no one ever talks about it. Going hand in hand with your awareness is your positioning. Where you choose to fight will have a very strong impact on if you survive. Choosing to take a 1v3 at the objective while your spawn wave is coming, that's not a bad decision. If your skills are sharp, you'll survive long enough that your team will come and help you to clear the objective. That was some good positioning. Now, taking a 1 versus 3 in the enemy spawn while another 10 people are spawning in, and you're probably going to die, and that's your fault. Now, you'll see me be way smarter about my positioning when I'm in comps than in pubs, but if you watch any of my clan battles, sometimes when I die, I'll be like, damn, I overextended. And I didn't die due to mechanics, but by placing myself in a poor position by being greedy and taking a poor fight. Now lastly, let's talk about our group fighting ability, and a lot goes into this. To be an effective group fighter, you need more than just the mechanics of being able to counter or riposte. You need to understand how active power works, which I believe Torn Banner, their line on this is that it actually works all of the time, some of the time. But you also need to know the more mental abilities of target selection and target switching. I think what sets some of the top TO fraggers apart is their ability to see the entire fight and not just focus on who they're originally fighting. They're looking for opportunities to turn their counters into unsuspecting enemies with target switches, or they're noticing low health enemies that they can switch to that'll be a fast kill. And if you get a few of these fast kills on unsuspecting enemies, it can turn an entire group fight real quick because they're number games. So now the $1,000,000 question, what's more important, the mechanics or the mental aspects of the game? And that's a tough question, and it's kind of going to have two answers from me here. I would say starting out in the game, and if you're just in normal public lobbies, understanding the mechanics gives you a massive advantage over your enemies, and you can snowball that advantage into high-quality games. However, at the higher end of team objective lobbies, whether you're playing in events or clan battles or just going into the server browser with all the other chads, I think the mental aspects of the game shine way more because every single player in those games is extremely mechanically strong. So success, it comes down more to putting yourself in the right places and making the right decisions and quickly adapting than just raw mechanical ability. However, I just want to note that I'm not saying it's all brains over brawn in those things, as there's kind of like a mechanical barrier of entry that you need to be past if you want to compete in those lobbies. Otherwise, you're just going to be absolutely shit stomped. But if you do have high quality mechanics, then it comes down a little bit more to your brains. All right, so let me put up our categories again in totality, and I did put some rating criteria to help you guys rate your own abilities. If I'm going too fast here, you can pause the video, that's fine, but definitely go down to the comments below and tell me your ratings and then average them for your overall score. I think this would be interesting for people to see what kind of areas of their game they need to work on more. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe on your way out.